The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.
The brutal Hermit Kingdom regime of North Korea does not have many allies, and to the extent that they're even an ally, we would say China is the biggest friend of North Korea. And United Nations sanctions have been imposed on North Korea since 2006 because of the country's nuclear tests and the rocket launches, etc. And recently, China started restricting imports of North Korean coal and sales of jet fuel under UN sanctions. And after North Korea conducted 4 nuclear tests, the UN Security Council passed a resolution in March which expanded UN sanctions, which really have the goal of withholding funds for the nuclear and ballistic missile programs of North Korea. And now China has announced a number of additional sanctions against North Korea. As I mentioned, we have these escalating bans on the sale of jet fuel to North Korea. And this has huge potential to totally put a stop to Pyongyang's state-owned airline, Air Korea, which, as you know, Louis, it doesn't fly too many places. The planes aren't particularly nice. It's probably not likely that you have a choice of too many types of dessert in first class on Air Korea, if there even is such a thing. And as I mentioned, this is all happening after this global nuclear security summit held in Washington last week. And you might remember, Louis, that President Barack Obama and Chinese President Xi Jinping said they are committed to denuclearization of the Korean peninsula. This is huge news, and at least part of the success can be attributed to President Obama for those recent talks. And this may be step 1A in an eventual demise of the North Korean regime, although early to say. But if you can't have jet fuel, if you can't develop those ballistic missiles that you so often use for political gain to the extent that you have any clout, that can be a real problem for a hermit kingdom like that of North Korea and Kim Jong-un.
That is true. Then you become desperate, and you might have to go to other places to get the supplies you need. And so are they going to end up giving money to people that we don't want to have, terrorist outlets, terrorist cells, or
well, they'd have to build those relationships.
Regimes.
They'd have to build those relationships in order to do that. I think the idea is they have such few friendships around the world that, yeah, obviously you can go places other than China for jet fuel, for example, but you're going to need to cultivate new relationships. And I don't need, there are some pretty bad people around the world who still don't have much of an interest in dealing with North Korea. So this could prove to be difficult for them. And even if we think ahead to a possible fall of the North Korean regime, it's not going to be a really fun big party. It's going to be an insane, massive international effort to help the people of North Korea. It will be very expensive for a long time. And it brings up questions of who is going to get involved there if we have an eventual fall of the regime in North Korea. Well, this would be a completely unique scenario.
Yeah, does the fall of that regime ultimately, inevitably end in a war? When you have someone like this in power, are they going to submit, or are they going to go out in a blaze of glory, as they'd put it?
It's unpredictable, right? Because this is really a singular situation. And then with regard to the people of North Korea, you have the people in the cities, especially Pyongyang, who are the sort of most brainwashed but the least poor. And then you have the people in the more rural areas of North Korea who are probably just more impoverished than brainwashed in many ways. It will be complex if and when it happens, but there is speculation that this is maybe the first of many steps towards the fall of the North Korean regime. And we'll be following. I mean, it is utterly compelling and horrifying what the people of North Korea have been living through. And so many documentaries now have brought us video and images and stories of what is going on there. And Louis, we're trying to actually get a North Korean defector on the show. Any news on how that's going?
It's difficult, yes, but it's a work in progress.
Okay, we do have a primary election tonight for both the Republicans and the Democrats. I want to start with the Republican side. Wisconsin is where voters will, some already voting, and most will vote in the hours to come. First, let's get reset on the Republican delegate count. As of this morning, according to the New York Times, Donald Trump leading the Republican race with 735 delegates. Ted Cruz in second place at 461. Marco Rubio, with an asterisk there, you will know that he is, of course, not in the race currently, but still with 171 delegates. And then John Kasich, 143 delegates. Needed to win 1237. So Donald Trump, some quick math, is about 7/12 of the way there. And Ted Cruz, rather, about a third of the way there. So let's now go to the next graphic, which is a list of the upcoming primaries. Of course, tonight, Wisconsin with 42 delegates at stake. Colorado in a few days with 37 delegates at stake. April 19th, we go to New York, 95 delegates at stake. And then a big day on the Republican side, April 26th, Connecticut, Delaware, Maryland. What is OA? I'm not sure what OA is. Do you remember what that one is, Lewis? That seems to be some kind of a typo.
Yes, seems to be. Well, it might be California.
It's Pennsylvania.
Oh,
Instead of
Pennsylvania.
P, of course, O next to P on the keyboard. And that is Pennsylvania.
Yes, California would be far more delegates than that.
Yes, and a different day altogether.
Yeah.
And then Rhode Island, all on April 26th. Let's not get caught up on whether it is an O or a P in Pennsylvania. Let's instead get caught up on the reality that even if Donald Trump gets every single delegate available from now until April 26th, he still doesn't win. He still doesn't cross the finish line of the 1,237 needed delegates. So let's take it one state at a time. What does Wisconsin look like tonight? Ted Cruz ranging from 32 to 43% support, depending on which poll we look at. Donald Trump from 30 to 42%, and John Kasich 18 to 23%. An average of recent polls has Ted Cruz in the lead by nearly 5 points tonight. John Kasich, he has 20% on average. So John Kasich could pull some delegates, maybe, depending on if he wins some congressional districts. His campaign says he is ahead in some individual congressional districts. So that's how things are looking tonight. What's the summary of this whole thing? Well, the nomination is looking far less likely than at any point in recent months for Donald Trump, but of course it is still not out of reach. This is the first test for Trump post-terrible week. He had that insane week last week where he said, number one, that women should be punished for having illegal abortions, and then had two new positions all within 2 hours, 3 positions in 2 hours on that issue. His campaign manager, Corey Lewandowski, arrested and charged with misdemeanor assault, and just not really a good week for Donald Trump. This will be the first test for Trump electorally after that point. And then the other important aspect of this is that Ted Cruz and Donald Trump both want John Kasich out. They both seem to think that with Kasich out, their path to the nomination is more direct and more quick. And there is no indication at all, Lewis, that Kasich is going anywhere.
Yeah, it's good for the possibility of a contested convention, and so fine. We can root for Kasich a little bit, I suppose.
No question about it. And of course, Wisconsin, the biggest cheese producing state in the country. Big cheese may be coming out big tonight. The nuttier cheese manufacturers tend to go for Republicans, although not surprisingly, the softer European-style cheeses may be voting on the Democratic side tonight. And Trump in Wisconsin is actually running on make American cheese actual cheese again, because as you know, Lewis, American cheese, really just cheese product, and there's a really big debate there that is polarizing in the Wisconsin primary.
I wish this was something that would come up during rallies,
right,
and debates even.
Yeah, I would love to hear Bernie Sanders and Hillary Clinton debate, the merits of a double cream versus a triple cream brie, and a lot of high-level diplomatic discussions revolve around those types of issues, and it's been totally absent even from the Wisconsin town halls, which has been shocking to me.
The last time cheese really came up in a political way was when they started using the brine to de-ice the roads over there.
Yeah.
and which was a wonderful idea, might I add.
Oh, absolutely lovely. Let's talk Democrats. Where are we on delegates ahead of tonight's Wisconsin primary on both the Republican and Democratic side? Well, let's take a look at the Democratic side. Now, I will tell, here's what we're doing now with the superdelegates, Lewis, if I may. Every time we include the superdelegates, we get yelled at. When we don't include the superdelegates, we get yelled at. So what we're doing is we are showing you the number of delegates that have been secured by voting, and then we will note what the superdelegate split is estimated to be. So currently Hillary Clinton with 1,243 delegates and Bernie Sanders with 980 delegates needed to win 2,383. As a side note, superdelegates currently sort of expected to be Clinton 469 and Sanders 31. So what are the upcoming primaries on the Democratic side? Today we have Wisconsin. In a few days, we have Wyoming. On April 19th, the big prize, nearly 300 delegates at stake in New York alone on April 19th. And then, of course, April 26th, Connecticut, Delaware, Maryland, Pennsylvania, and Rhode Island. As a note of interest, if Hillary Clinton were to win every single delegate available between now and April 26th, it would not be enough to secure the nomination. And of course, in many of these states, Bernie Sanders is right in there around 50%, some a little over 50%, some a little under 50%. How about tonight? What are the polls telling us about tonight in Wisconsin? Well, a variety of polls which have Bernie Sanders somewhere between 41 and 51%. And a variety of polls that have Hillary Clinton between 43 and 49%. In a Real Clear Politics average of recent polls, Bernie Sanders up by 2.6 within the margin of error for the most part, but not a huge advantage for Bernie. Now, what are the things to watch tonight on the Democratic side? Number one, Hillary Clinton has dominated in the South. Bernie Sanders won 5 of 6 recent contests, although those were mostly caucuses. And there's the question about whether Bernie can win a bona fide primary in the Midwest and really claim momentum, because at some point, Bernie Sanders is going to need to win lots of primaries outside of the West and Northeast. A loss for Hillary Clinton tonight in Wisconsin would not be good in terms of optics, although if she loses by a few points, the delegate math is not going to be hugely damaging to her. Bernie Sanders won in Minnesota and won in Michigan, and this would show, if you were to give Bernie Sanders a win in Wisconsin, Hillary's at least sporadic weakness in the region. Wisconsin and Wyoming today and on April 9th are really positioning Lewis for New York on April 19th, which is huge.
It's huge, and the Clintons have traditionally done quite well in New York.
Yes, they have.
But I'm still going to say I'm optimistic here. And people say it's very unlikely that Bernie will be the nominee, but it's still perfectly possible.
Oh, it is absolutely possible. And as I mentioned, even if Hillary sweeps 100% of the delegates in every primary from here to April 26th, she still does not secure the nomination, although, of course, that is not going to happen because Bernie Sanders does have support. April 26th will be a big day for both the Republican and Democratic primaries. And we have, at this point, essentially 3 weeks until these primaries both could shift dramatically. And we'll continue to follow the polls, and tomorrow we will have results. Send me your thoughts about where you think the Republican primary is going and the Democratic primary. I'm on Twitter at dpacman. Lewis is on Twitter at lewismotamedy.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com. The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.
The David Pakman Show is maybe a little different from other programs that you watch or listen to. We are mostly funded by the audience through the David Pakman Show membership program. You can read more about that at davidpakman.com/membership. Today's new member of the day is Jason Wyman. Jason, thank you so much for being a member. Jason gets access to all of the great member benefits, all of which you can read about and sample for free at davidpakman.com/membership. Big thank you to Jason. All right, Lewis, the David Pakman Instagram experience continues to build momentum. Of course, I am now on Instagram at instagram.com/david.pakman, or just search Instagram for david.pakman. Let's look at my 2 top liked pictures of the week. The second most popular picture on my Instagram account of the week is me holding a baby. The 2 times, Lewis, that I have put pictures up of me holding babies, the internet has been abuzz, truly, truly abuzz. And the most compelling thing about this picture is every time I pick up a baby, the baby looks perplexed by my face. And I don't know if it's a particular element of my face.
Well, hold on.
Yeah.
Is it your face or is it your hair?
That's true. In this picture, the baby does seem to be looking sort of towards the top of my head. So maybe it is my hair that is confusing to the baby.
I mean, it's confusing to many adults.
Yeah, even just because you're a baby doesn't mean you're any less or more able to figure out what's going on with my hair. It's equally perplexing to humans, Homo sapiens of all ages. But always a very popular thing, Lewis, when I hold a baby. I understand now why politicians often pick up and kiss babies, because it just seems babies are a magnet for attention.
That's true. And as a politician, it is the best photo op you can possibly get.
And the most liked picture on my Instagram account, david.pakman, this week, me with my dad's dog. This is Nemo, also known as Captain Nemo to some. He is a black English lab. And this is a picture of him minutes after he ate a piece of pizza right off the floor. He found floor pizza at my dad's house that a 12-year-old had left on the floor, and of course the dog figured out where that pizza was within seconds and had instantly eaten it. I mean, I've never seen animals like English labs that are able to just consume food in seconds. I don't even know that the teeth are needed, because it's just a fraction of a second and the food is gone.
It is incredible. I don't know why we say the term pig out, or I was eating like a pig, or you were acting like a pig. We could probably take every instance of that and replace it with dog, and it would make just as much sense, if not more.
Depends on the breed for sure. And now Nemo is a very svelte 65 pounds, but due to some confusion and novice dog ownership, Nemo for a while was being fed 2 scoops per day as opposed to 2 cups per day. And if you've seen the size of some of these scoops, Lewis, you can very quickly deduce that 1 scoop is by no means 1 cup. He was up over 85 pounds at one point, and he now is more at a better weight for Nemo, 65 pounds. And that is me with Nemo. Dogs and babies, I am quickly finding out, are social media gold.
More people liking the dog picture, however, which leads me to believe that people generally prefer dogs over babies, which I must say is true in my case.
You wouldn't ever accidentally own a dog, but you might accidentally have a kid. That, I think you're very familiar with how that could work.
It could work that way. Sometimes animals land on people's laps as well, and you just find yourself with a pet all of a sudden.
Follow me on Instagram, david.pakman. A lot of exciting stuff and behind-the-scenes pictures from the studio, etc., etc. Okay, there are rumors now that Donald Trump might have bombshell information about Fox News. There was an article published over the weekend in New York Magazine where author and journalist Gabriel Sherman reveals how Donald Trump came to possess what is being called ultra insider information about not only Fox News, but it's a president / creator / developer Roger Ailes, which, if it were made public, could supposedly be hugely damaging to Fox News. And according to great Gabriel Sherman, it is the possession of this information that has discouraged Fox News from going all out against Trump, although they've been casually sort of anti-Trump for months. Let's take a look at the quote from Gabriel Sherman's article explaining this, where he says, "It was also thanks to some information he had gathered that Trump was able to do something that no other Republican has done before, take on Fox News. An odd bit of coincidence had given him a card to play against Fox founder Roger Ailes. In 2014, I published a biography of Ailes, which upset the famously paranoid executive. Several months before it landed in stores, Ailes fired his longtime PR advisor, Brian Lewis, accusing him of being a source. During Lewis's severance negotiations, Lewis hired Judd Burstein, a powerhouse litigator, and claimed he had bombs that would destroy Ailes and Fox News. That's when Trump got involved. Gabriel Sherman continued to write, when Roger was having problems, he didn't call 97 people, he called me, Trump said. Burstein, as it turned out, had worked for Trump briefly in the 90s, and Ailes asked Trump to mediate. Trump ran the negotiations out of his office at Trump Tower. Roger had lawyers, very expensive lawyers, and they couldn't do anything. I solved the problem. Fox paid Lewis millions to go away quietly, and Trump, I'm told, learned everything Lewis had planned to leak. If Ailes ever truly went to war against Trump, Trump would have the arsenal to launch a retaliatory strike. A spokeswoman for the Trump campaign was asked to comment and declined about the report. The obviously interesting question here is, what does he know? But the more relevant question is, will it matter at this point whether or not Fox News goes into, quote, all-out war against Trump? I don't think either way he gets to 1,237 delegates before the convention.
No. So this is information you'd want to hold on to until after. And if Fox, for some reason, decided that if Trump is the nominee,
right,
that they still don't support Trump,
right,
that's when he could really use this as some serious leverage.
I tend to agree. Yeah, I don't think there's much of a. I mean, at this point, what could Fox do? I guess they could go hard anti-Trump, which, yes, it could hurt Trump in what's left of the Republican nominating process. But I maintain, as I have for a while, that Donald Trump is not going to get to 1,237 delegates, no matter what Fox News says, unless they somehow come up with some way to actually help Trump as opposed to hurt him. It is interesting. It is fascinating. Nobody really commenting about this so far. I think, if anything, this would matter only if Trump secures the nomination and goes on to the national election against either Bernie Sanders or Hillary Clinton. Remember this backstory, the backstory of the rumblings around maybe Paul Ryan being selected to be the Republican nominee in the case of a contested Republican National Convention. When the rumors surfaced several weeks ago, Paul Ryan officially denied that he was interested. He denied he was seeking the nomination. It was all very reminiscent of season 4 of House of Cards, which I know many in our audience have been watching. We now have more information about this, and it is only getting more and more intriguing. A source close to the Koch brothers told the Huffington Post that Charles Koch is confident that Paul Ryan could end up with the nomination if Donald Trump ends up at least 100 delegates shy of the required 1,237 before the Cleveland Republican National Convention over the summer. Charles Koch reportedly believes that if Paul Ryan were to be presented as an option at a contested convention, that he would be a shoo-in. That is a quote from the source. So even though Paul Ryan has publicly said he's not interested, this source, a different source close to Paul Ryan, has said Ryan would only be interested if the Republican Party united behind him. Well, that's sort of a way to weasel out of it, because if you haven't been running for president, the only way that you would have a shot at the nomination at a contested convention would be if the party unites behind you. So that's sort of a meaningless denial, right, Lewis? Well, he would only be interested if the Republican Party unites behind him. If he's going to have a shot, it would only be if they unite behind him at the convention and say, we don't want any of this nonsense. We think Cruz is not the right guy. We think Trump is nuts. We want Paul Ryan. That's the only scenario where this would even become a factor.
Yeah, and just imagining the chaos that would ensue if this actually happened. I don't think he wants to be the nominee. And I suppose, though, he could be convinced by people like the Koch brothers, because they have some serious influence.
Now, Mark Holden, who's the general counsel for Koch Industries, says that the claim is completely false. And he said, quote, "Let me be clear. We have never advocated for a specific candidate in a presidential primary, and we have no plans to do so now." A lot of denials, Lewis, but the speculation about Paul Ryan is only growing, and a lot of it is the nervousness around those hypothetical national matchups. Of course, the Republican establishment does not want Trump, but even the hypothetical matchups against Ted Cruz are very favorable to both Hillary Clinton and Bernie Sanders. John Kasich actually does do better. He does the best of the three candidates against Hillary and Bernie in hypothetical matchups, but there's no real indication that Kasich is on any kind of path to the nomination right now.
Yeah. Kasich, I think, would be, in my opinion, the better debater over Paul Ryan, but Paul Ryan certainly would be far better than Cruz or Trump, far more effective.
And this is scary because the sense is Paul Ryan would have a better chance of defeating Hillary or Bernie than would Trump or Cruz. Hard to compare to Kasich, who does quite well in the polls. But also, Paul Ryan is the type of crazy that really gets the bad stuff done. Donald Trump, if he were to be president, is not going to ban Muslims. He is not going to get Mexico to pay to build a wall that's going to cost billions of dollars. The ideas are nuts, but they have no chance of happening. Paul Ryan as president could get very crazy things through in terms of budgets and what programs get cut in the United States. Paul Ryan could do real damage to organizations like Planned Parenthood or whatever. This would really be a bad thing for the country. So I hope that the Republican establishment does not put in someone like Paul Ryan, because I think he has the best shot of winning when compared to someone like Trump or Cruz. And in addition to that, the saving grace would be if it angers Trump so much that he runs as a third party, because a lot of the names being floated, even the idea of a Romney comeback, I don't know that Romney could win, but I think Romney would have a much better shot than Trump at winning the national election.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So I'd be thrilled if this did happen. And yes, I can only think of a small handful of people like Walker and a few others that would be as damaging as Paul Ryan if they could actually accomplish the things they want to accomplish.
Last thing on this. I know there is this thing called Rule 40B for the Republican convention, which says you can't actually win the nomination unless you win a plurality of the vote in 8 primaries. That rule was created for a very specific scenario in Tampa at a prior convention, and we've already seen some Republican insiders and convention organizers and officials say, oh yeah, I'd like to see that rule changed or eliminated because I don't think it's relevant for 2016. So don't think for a second that Rule 40B is going to prevent anybody from being the nominee if that's who the Republicans determine that they want. Give us a like on Facebook, closing in on 50,000 Facebook likes. Of course, it's facebook.com/David Pakman Show.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com. Welcome back to the David Pakman Show.
You've probably at least heard of fracking, but what exactly is it and why is it controversial? We are going to take a look at fracking and whether or not it's a safe and viable source of energy. Fracking is actually an abbreviation for the term hydraulic fracturing. Fracking is a method of harvesting natural gas from shale rock formations. Essentially, the way that it works is that wells are drilled into shale rock, and then a mixture of water, sand, and various other chemicals is injected into the rock, which causes fractures, hence the name. The liquid is pumped out of the well, but the sand holds the fractures open, which allows natural gas to be extracted from the well. The United States currently consumes around 27 trillion cubic feet of natural gas per year, according to the U.S. Energy Information Administration. And in 2014, 27% of the electricity generated in America came from natural gas. Of that 27, close to half, 47% to be exact, came from shale deposits. So fracking in the U.S. isn't uncommon. Some of the major fracking sites in the country are located in Oklahoma, Ohio, and Pennsylvania. Fracking has been notably less successful internationally. A number of countries, including Germany, Scotland, and Bulgaria, have actually banned fracking due to health and environmental concerns. Proponents of fracking insist that the process is safe, but many of these groups are run by organizations with a vested interest in fracking. For example, Energy from Shale has a website with basic information about how fracking works, along with a large amount of pro-fracking resources. And as it turns out, Energy from Shale is owned by the American Petroleum Institute, a trade association for the oil and natural gas industries. So what do we actually know about the effects of fracking? There have been a number of high-profile fracking accidents in the last few years, but are those outliers or are they indicative of a greater risk? We'll be looking into the direct impacts of fracking in a few minutes, but first let's take a look at some of the indirect impacts. For starters, fracking uses an enormous amount of water. The Environmental Protection Agency estimates that between 70 and 140 billion gallons of water are used for fracking every year. That's roughly equivalent to the amount of water used by Chicago, the third largest city in the country. All of that water has to come from somewhere, and it often comes from groundwater reserves, rivers, and lakes. This brings up some obvious concerns about water shortages, especially in conjunction with the hazards that the actual fracking process can pose to water supplies. It's also worth noting that because shale gas deposits are not always located right next to convenient water sources, water must sometimes be transported by truck. A study from Boulder, Colorado estimates that 700 truck round trips are required to transport 5 million gallons of water to a single fracking site. Trucks are also used to transport heavy equipment and chemicals to and from fracking sites, which brings the total round trip count to over 1,100 in a 2-month period. So when evaluating the environmental impacts of the fracking industry, we should be aware of the gas consumption of these trucks, as well as the pollutants that they put into the atmosphere. Sand is another key part of the fracking process. And as I mentioned, the sand particles injected into the wells hold those cracks in the rock open so that the natural gas can flow out. However, fracking companies don't just shovel sand off of beaches. The mining and use of sand results in silica particles being released into the air. Inhalation of silica is known to cause lung cancer, and the risk to workers as well as people living near fracking sites should not be ignored. Eric Eswine, a researcher with the National Institute for Occupational Safety and Health, conducted a study that found dangerous levels of silica in the air near fracking sites. Eswine discussed his findings in an interview with NPR.
He and his colleagues visited 11 fracking sites in 5 states: Arkansas, Colorado, North Dakota, Pennsylvania, and Texas. At every site, the researchers found high levels of silica in the air. 79% of the collected samples exceeded the recommended exposure limits set by Eswine's agency.
The fracking process itself also carries with it certain risks to the environment as well as public health. In 2014, there were 484 spills reported by oil and gas companies in Colorado. About 10% of those spills resulted in contamination of water resources. 10% may not seem like much, but that's a very high degree of risk when it comes to what is arguably the most important natural resource. Meanwhile, in Pennsylvania, there have been a number of high-profile fracking incidents involving contaminated drinking water. Last year, scientists found traces of drilling chemicals in the drinking water of Bradford County. And as recently as this March, 2 Pennsylvania families were awarded $4.24 million in a 7-year case against Cabot Oil and Gas Corporation, whose fracking operations were found to have polluted drinking water with methane. Additionally, while there have been only 271 official complaints regarding contaminated water in Pennsylvania since December of 2007, over 2,300 additional complaints were improperly filed and recorded. The fracking complaints were stored in filing cabinets, and most cases weren't entered into any formal central tracking system. This means that the risk of contamination is likely much higher than reported because large numbers of complaints aren't even being accounted for. Once they contaminate water supplies, the chemicals used in fracking can cause all sorts of health problems, including cancer and liver disease. Air pollution is also a huge concern. During the fracking process, wastewater known as flowback returns to the surface, and then chemicals may be released into the air from the flowback, including toxic compounds like benzene, a hydrocarbon. In fact, a study of fracking sites in Texas found dangerously high levels of benzene in the air near the wells. Benzene occurs naturally in petroleum and can also be found in cigarette smoke. Short-term exposure to benzene in the air can cause dizziness and headaches. The major effect of benzene from long-term exposure is on the blood. Benzene causes harmful effects on the bone marrow and can cause a decrease in red blood cells, leading to anemia. The Department of Health and Human Services has determined that benzene causes cancer in humans. Long-term exposure to high levels of benzene in the air can cause leukemia, cancer of the blood-forming organs. But perhaps the most troubling consequence of fracking is the potential for induced seismic events, earthquakes. A 2015 study published in the Bulletin of Seismological Society of America found 77 earthquakes in Ohio that were linked to fracking activities in the area. The earthquakes in question were relatively minor, none above magnitude 3. Most fracking earthquakes are caused by the injection of wastewater into disposal wells. A series of earthquakes in Oklahoma have been linked to the disposal of wastewater by both oil and natural gas companies. The largest of these was a 5.7 magnitude earthquake in Prague, Oklahoma, which was the biggest in the state's history. It destroyed 14 homes, damaged infrastructure and numerous buildings, and injured 2 people. Even if fracking had no negative environmental and health impacts, it's still an industry that continues our dependence on fossil fuels for political and national security reasons. About 17% of our oil imports come from Saudi Arabia, and we've talked extensively on the program about the many problems with our continued partnership with that brutal extremist regime. Furthermore, armed conflicts over energy resources are becoming more common, and it's in the best interest of peace everywhere to move towards sustainable energy resources. So we've seen that fracking clearly carries with it numerous significant risks to public health as well as national security. Despite this, fracking is still permitted in a majority of American states. New York State did manage to ban fracking last year, but as of right now, no other state with significant natural gas reserves has implemented a ban. In California, Governor Jerry Brown has voiced support of fracking in the state, despite the fact that the risks to California are particularly severe. For one thing, California is prone to earthquakes, and the risk for a major earthquake caused by fracking should not be ignored. Additionally, California is in the middle of a drought. The amount of water combined with the risk of contamination makes fracking an industry that California cannot afford to sustain, and there is a moratorium on offshore drilling currently in California. We know that fracking is bad for the environment, and we know that it's bad for our health in the short term as well. It's not in our best national security interests, and given the advancements that have been made and will be made in alternative, sustainable energy technologies, fracking is simply not necessary, and it doesn't make sense from an economic or environmental standpoint.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com. The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.
The bigger picture issue around superdelegates in the Democratic primary has been whether they are completely ridiculous and absurd, particularly in the wake of DNC Chair Debbie Wasserman Schultz effectively admitting that superdelegates are meant to prevent activist candidates from running against establishment Democrats. That's the big picture issue. A more micro issue is whether specific superdelegates with conflicts of interest should be barred from participating in the primary process. And one such superdelegate is a guy named Bill Clinton, former president and husband of current Democratic presidential candidate Hillary Clinton. Bill Clinton. There have been more and more calls for Bill Clinton to recuse himself, especially after more than 6 New York State superdelegates insisted that they were going to support Hillary Clinton no matter what the results of New York State's primary end up being. But Bill Clinton is saying no, that he can be fair. He said late last week that his vote at the 2008 Democratic National Convention shows that he's willing to back candidates other than Hillary Clinton. And it is true, back in 2008, Hillary Clinton was also a candidate, and Bill Clinton, as a superdelegate, cast a vote for President Barack Obama. He said, last time I did what my candidate asked, I voted for Barack Obama. Now, the big difference, I don't know that this is a great defense, because in 2008, there was no delegate vote. Hillary Clinton actually interrupted the roll call vote with a motion that Barack Obama be selected in a sort of call for unity. I'll remind you what that was like. This is Hillary on the floor of the 2008 DNC.
Madam Secretary. Madam Secretary, I move that the convention suspend the procedural rules and suspend the further conduct of the roll call vote. All votes cast by the delegates will be counted, and that I move Senator Barack Obama of Illinois be selected by this convention by acclamation as the nominee of the Democratic Party for President of the United States.
Yeah, so anyway, that whole charade, just to remind you that Bill Clinton's vote for Barack Obama in 2008 was not some big controversial thing, that there was no actual full vote and the entire thing was suspended. Depending on how Bernie Sanders does in the primaries remaining this month, we could have a drastically different situation this year. But I have to tell you, I'm not worried about Bill Clinton. The Clintons have been team players, and although there's no doubt that Hillary Clinton and Bill Clinton will do whatever is reasonably possible to support the candidacy of Hillary Clinton this year, I actually am not worried about Bill Clinton being a superdelegate at the micro level. No doubt, lots of questions about the superdelegate system at the macro level, but I think this is a lot to much ado about nothing.
Yes, why should we be pointing the finger at Bill Clinton? It's not irrelevant, but it's pretty close. We should be pointing the finger at Debbie Wasserman Schultz.
And the broader system.
Right.
No doubt about it. Ideal Conceal is a Minnesota startup which has designed a gun that looks like a smartphone, complete with a fake camera lens and headphone jack. Their marketing materials say smartphones are everywhere, so your new pistol will easily blend in with today's environment. From soccer moms to professionals of every type, this gun allows you the option of not being a victim. Now, if you're watching along with us, you see the picture of the gun in its enclosed smartphone disguise and its open gun status, I guess you would say. It has a small handle that pops out when the pistol's safety is opened, and it is ready to fire with one click, according to the manufacturer. The pistol, which has the exact same dimensions of a Samsung Galaxy S7 phone, is currently priced at $395, but it won't be available until later this year. The pistol's developer, Kirk Kellberg, told NBC affiliate KARE11 that he's already received about 4,000 inquiries from people who want to buy these smartphone-like guns. He holds a concealed carry permit in Minnesota. He said he was once walking through a restaurant with his regular gun-shaped gun when a child became frightened, and it gave him the idea that there might be a better way to have people walk around with guns but not frighten kids. So I can see the headlines now, Lewis. Unarmed man shot while holding a phone in a way that it looked like it could have been a smartphone gun. Police weren't sure, Lewis, and they had to take him out. He actually was just trying to call in a takeout order.
Or film the police that he was encountering.
Using the camera on your phone to record police officers potentially committing crimes is about to become a lot more dangerous when it could be a smartphone-looking gun.
And this was my first thought. This could be it's almost as if it's already too late. This story has gone viral, and once this is on the mind of all the police officers, this is really, really bad. If
you have one of these smartphone guns, is the equivalent of a pocket dial shooting yourself in the ass?
It would be. It would be. Yeah.
Well, you don't want to know what the smartphone gun equivalent of a selfie is. I'll tell you, it is ugly.
Mm-hmm. That's a good one, Dave. Yes, and I fully predict that there will be, if this product actually hits the market, that we are going to hear some real gems about it.
Well, we already have, right? That this is a good way not to frighten kids who are going to be around guns. It's especially great for families with young children. Now, children won't be afraid to see that mommy has a gun in her purse or about why she carries a gun with her all the time because of the very dangerous world around her.
And now that kid thinks they're reaching for a cell phone. Instead, it's a gun, and boom, something bad happens.
As we know, toddlers responsible for more deaths in 2015 via guns than terrorists in the United States. As soon as those kids start getting into screen time, just wait. That number is going to skyrocket, no doubt about it. We have a voicemail number that's available anytime you want to call. The number is 219-2-DAVID-P. The shorter your voicemail, within reason, the more likely it is it will make it onto the show. Here is a really interesting voicemail I received this morning.
Yes. I'm a retired police officer, Chicago. The exact same thing happened in my presence as far as shooting the dog was concerned. I was working with an overbearing, cowardly police officer who shot at a dog immediately after the dog exited the home in our direction. And the police officer actually shot me in the elbow.
Yeah.
Yes, he was a coward.
So yesterday, during the story about an NYPD officer shooting a dog wagging its tail, Lewis said the cop is a coward. And we said, well, is it cowardice or is it incompetence or what is it? And here is a former police officer who said, oh, no, I've seen this, and it's cowardice. You feel vindicated, Lewis?
I do. It's great to hear that from a police officer who can officially validate it.
Yes, although he has no particular knowledge of this story we discussed outside of news reports. We will be clear about that.
Yes.
On the bonus show today, is Spain going to drop the siesta? Big news. I have a lot of thoughts about this. China is censoring the Panama Papers we told you about yesterday. And an ISIS leader's former wife is saying he's actually a pretty normal guy. We'll see if we can figure out what his habits were around the house and see sort of how that compares and contrasts with his actions as a militant Islamic group leader. All of those stories and more on today's bonus show. There is only one way to get the bonus show, and it is by signing up for membership at davidpakman.com/membership.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.